From the outside, their life looked almost perfect. They lived in a quiet neighborhood where the houses stood close but not too close, where people waved in the mornings and children rode bicycles in the evenings. Their home had white walls, clean windows, and flower pots near the door that she carefully watered every day. Neighbors often said they were a beautiful couple. He was confident, well-dressed, and spoke in a way that made people listen. She was gentle, soft-spoken, and carried a calm smile that made others feel comfortable. She was 7 months pregnant, and the news had once filled the house with excitement. At least, that was how it seemed to everyone else. In the early days of the pregnancy, he had smiled proudly when they told friends. He placed his hand on her growing belly in public and spoke about the future as if nothing could ever go wrong. He talked about teaching the child how to ride a bike, about family trips, about building a strong home. People admired him for that. They thought he was responsible, steady, and ready to be a father. But inside the house, things felt different. She noticed a change slowly. It started with small things. He began coming home later than usual. When she asked if everything was okay, he would sigh deeply, as if her simple question was heavy. He blamed work. He said pressure was building. He said she wouldn't understand. She believed him at first. She wanted to believe him. She spent her days preparing for the baby, folding tiny clothes, reading about newborn care, cleaning corners that were already clean. Pregnancy had made her more tired, but she rarely complained. She wanted peace in the home. She thought if she stayed calm, everything would stay calm around her. But peace became harder to hold on to. He had always liked attention. Even before marriage, he enjoyed being admired. Compliments fed him. Praise energized him. And recently, he had found a new source of that attention. It started innocently, at least in his mind. A woman from his workplace had begun praising his ideas during meetings. She laughed at his jokes. She told him he deserved more recognition. She said his wife was lucky to have him. Those words stayed with him longer than they should have. At home, his pregnant wife moved slower now. She needed help reaching high shelves. She asked him to sit with her sometimes in the evenings because the baby kicked harder at night, and it made her anxious. But instead of feeling needed in a loving way, he felt burdened. He began to see her care as weakness. Her softness irritated him. He didn't say this out loud. Instead, his tone changed. When she asked if he could come to a doctor's appointment, he replied, "I'm busy. You can handle it." When she tried to talk about baby names, he shrugged and scrolled through his phone. When she carefully cooked his favorite meal, he barely noticed. She felt the distance, but couldn't explain it. Some nights, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling while he slept beside her, his back turned. She wondered if pregnancy had changed her too much. Maybe she wasn't as fun anymore. Maybe she talked too much about the baby. Maybe she had become boring. She blamed herself quietly. One evening, a neighbor stopped by with a small gift, baby blankets wrapped in soft paper. The neighbor smiled warmly and said, "You're glowing." He must be so excited. She forced a smile and nodded. He stood nearby, checking his phone, pretending to listen. The neighbor left thinking everything was perfect. After the door closed, silence filled the room. "You didn't have to stand there like that," he said suddenly. She looked confused. "Like what?" "Like you're helpless. You make me look like I don't do anything." She blinked. "I didn't say that." "You don't have to say it. It shows." His words stayed with her long after he walked away. The truth was, he had already started building another world in his mind, one where he wasn't tied down by responsibility. The woman at work had begun texting him late at night. At first, the messages were about work tasks. Then they became jokes. Then compliments. Then questions about his marriage. "Is she still emotional all the time?" she once texted. He replied, "You have no idea." He didn't stop to think about how unfair that was. He didn't consider the weight his wife carried daily, physically and emotionally. Instead, he enjoyed the feeling of being understood by someone who only saw the polished version of him. The woman at work had never seen him impatient. She had never seen him ignore a call from home. She had never watched his wife sit alone at a clinic appointment, holding ultrasound pictures by herself. At the next doctor visit, The nurse asked gently, "Is your husband coming today?" She shook her head. "He's busy with work." The nurse smiled kindly but said nothing more. When she returned home that afternoon, holding a small envelope with scanned results, she found him dressed neatly, preparing to go out again. "Where are you going?" she asked softly. "Dinner. Work thing. You just got home." "I can't skip it." She nodded. "The baby is healthy," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "The doctor said everything looks good." "That's good," he replied without looking up. She stood there for a moment, hoping he would ask more. He didn't. After he left, she sat on the edge of the bed and placed his hand from memory onto her belly. The baby kicked gently. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly. She told herself she was just tired. Meanwhile, at a restaurant across town, he sat across from the other woman. She wore bright colors and strong perfume. She laughed loudly at his stories. When he complained about how stressful home had become, she leaned forward and said, "You deserve peace, not pressure." He believed her. He didn't notice how easily she dismissed the life he had built. He didn't question why she smiled slightly when he described his pregnant wife's exhaustion. He only felt lighter in her presence. Back at home, his wife prepared warm milk for herself and tried to distract her thoughts by arranging the baby's small crib. She touched the wooden bars carefully, imagining tiny hands gripping them. She imagined soft cries in the night and whispered lullabies. She still believed he would change once the baby arrived. She thought fatherhood might bring him back to her. But each day, his patience grew thinner. One afternoon, she asked him gently, "Are you happy?" He paused. "Why would you ask that? You seem far away." "I'm just tired. You don't talk to me anymore." "There's nothing to talk about." Her chest tightened. "There's always something to talk about." He looked at her growing belly and sighed. "Everything is about the baby now." She stared at him. "It's our baby." He didn't respond. The house that once felt warm now felt heavy. Words were spoken carefully, as if the wrong sentence could cause an explosion. She moved around him quietly. He avoided staying in the same room for too long. And still, when neighbors asked, she smiled. When family members called, he answered cheerfully. To the outside world, they were still the couple everyone admired, but cracks were spreading across the surface. Late one night, as she sat alone in the living room, she heard his phone buzz on the table. He was in the shower. She didn't mean to look. She truly didn't. But the screen lit up and a message preview appeared. "Wish you were here instead of there." Her heart stopped. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Another message followed. Does she suspect anything? The bathroom water was still running. She quickly looked away, guilt mixing with fear. She told herself there had to be an explanation. Work joke, misunderstanding, anything else. When he came out, drying his hair, he saw her sitting still. "Everything okay?" he asked. She forced a nod. "Yes." But something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she felt not just distance, but doubt. And in another part of the city, the woman who sent those messages smiled to herself, unaware that storms were already forming. Part one ends with a quiet house, a tired pregnant woman holding her belly in the dark, and a man standing at the edge of choices he refuses to fully see. The doubt did not leave her the next morning. She woke up early, as she often did now, before the sun had fully risen. Her body felt heavy, and the baby moved slowly inside her, as if sensing her unease. She lay still for a few minutes, listening to the quiet of the house. He was already awake, standing in the bathroom, talking softly on his phone. His voice was low, careful. When he came out, he looked surprised to see her watching him. "You're up early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. He nodded and walked past her without another word. The moment passed, but the feeling stayed. Something had changed after what she saw on his phone the night before. She hadn't confronted him. She didn't know how. Part of her was afraid of the answer. Another part hoped she was wrong. She went into the kitchen and started making breakfast. The smell of toast filled the air. She cracked eggs carefully, one hand resting on the counter for support. When she placed the plate in front of him, he glanced at it and said, "I'm not hungry." You haven't eaten since last night, she said gently. I'll eat later. He grabbed his keys and left. The door closed with sound that echoed longer than usual. She sat down slowly and stared at the untouched plate. Her appetite disappeared. Later that day, she tried to distract herself. She washed clothes, folded baby blankets, and arranged small socks in neat rows. But her mind kept returning to the messages. Who was the woman? How long had this been going on? And why did she sound so confident? In the afternoon, her phone rang. It was her mother. She answered with a forced brightness. How are you feeling today? Her mother asked. I'm fine, she replied. You sound tired. I just didn't sleep well. Is everything okay with him? She hesitated. Yes, he's just busy. Her mother paused, as if wanting to say more, but then changed the subject. They talked about baby preparations and weather and simple things. When the call ended, the house felt quiet again. Across town, he sat at his desk, barely focused on his work. His phone buzzed with a message. Did she see anything? The other woman asked. No, he typed back. I don't think so. Good, she replied. Pregnancy makes people sensitive. He stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of relief and irritation. Part of him knew this was wrong, but another part enjoyed the secrecy. It made him feel powerful, desired, important. That evening, he came home later than usual. She was sitting on the couch, holding a small notebook where she had written baby names. She looked up when she heard the door. You're late, she said. Work ran long. She nodded. Can we talk? He sighed and loosened his tie. About what? About us. There's nothing wrong with us. She swallowed. I feel like you're slipping away from me. He laughed softly, not kindly. You're imagining things. I saw messages on your phone. The room went still. What messages? He asked. She took a deep breath. From another woman. His face hardened. You went through my phone? It lit up. I didn't plan to. So now you're spying on me? That's not what I'm saying. He raised his voice. You don't trust me? I want to, she said, her eyes filling. But I need honesty. He turned away and ran a hand through his hair. You're overreacting. She's just someone from work. Then why does she talk about me like that? He didn't answer. Silence stretched between them. The baby kicked suddenly, making her gasp. See, he said sharply. Stress isn't good for you. This is exactly why I don't want to argue. She looked at him, hurt and confused. You're the one causing the stress. He grabbed his phone and walked into the bedroom. I'm tired. We'll talk later. But later never came. That night, she cried quietly into her pillow so he wouldn't hear. Her body ached, and fear wrapped itself around her chest. She wondered how someone she loved could feel so far away while lying just inches from her. The next few days passed in an uneasy pattern. He was polite but distant. Conversations were short. When she asked questions, he gave quick answers. When she tried to touch his arm, he pulled away slightly. One afternoon, she decided to step outside for some fresh air. She walked slowly down the street, her hand resting on her belly. Neighbors smiled and greeted her warmly. Not long now. One woman said cheerfully, Yes, she replied, smiling back. Not long. But inside, she felt uncertain about everything. When she returned home, she found him sitting on the couch, staring at his phone with a small smile. When he noticed her, he quickly locked the screen. Who was that? She asked. No one. She sat across from him. Please stop lying to me. He stood up suddenly. I'm not lying. You're just not thinking clearly. Don't say that, she said quietly. Don't make me feel like I'm crazy. He pointed toward her belly. Look at you. You're emotional all the time. Everything turns into a problem. Tears rolled down her face. I just want to feel safe. His expression softened for a brief moment, then hardened again. I can't do this right now. He left the house again. She stayed on the couch long after the sun went down, replaying his words in her mind. Emotional, problem, crazy. She pressed her hands against her belly and whispered softly to the baby, promising protection even when she wasn't sure how. Later that night, the other woman sent another message. She's probably asleep by now, she wrote. You could be here instead. He hesitated, then replied with a smile emoji. That smile would later haunt him. The next morning, she felt unwell. Her head hurt, and her body felt weaker than usual. She called him at work. I don't feel good, she said. I have meetings all day, he replied. I think I should go to the clinic. Take a cab. She paused. I wish you were here. I'll check on you later, he said and hung up. At the clinic, the nurse checked her and told her to rest more. Stress, the nurse said gently, could affect her health. She nodded silently. When she returned home, she found a small gift bag on the table. Inside was a baby toy and a note from him that said, Sorry, busy days. She stared at the note for a long time. That evening, they ate dinner in silence. She pushed food around her plate. Why are you still angry? He asked suddenly. I'm not angry, she replied. I'm hurt. He scoffed. You're making things harder than they need to be. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. I need you to choose this family. He looked away. I already have. But his actions told a different story. As night fell, tension filled the house like thick air before a storm. Words were held back, emotions pushed down, and resentment quietly grew. Neither of them knew how close they were to a moment that would change everything. And somewhere else, the woman who laughed at messages felt secure, unaware that her laughter was built on pain that was about to spill into the open. The tension that had been building for weeks finally broke on a quiet evening. It started with something small. It always did. She had been resting on the couch, her feet slightly swollen, a thin blanket over her legs. The house was quiet except for the sound of the television playing softly in the background. When he walked in, she could tell right away that his mood was dark. His jaw was tight. He dropped his keys louder than usual. You're late again, she said carefully. He didn't answer. She waited a moment, then spoke again. I made dinner. It's still warm. I ate already, he replied sharply. With who? The words slipped out before she could stop them. He turned toward her slowly. What did you say? She sat up straighter, her heart racing. I just meant you didn't tell me. You're questioning me now, he snapped. I'm trying to understand, she said. You're never here. You're always on your phone. You don't talk to me anymore. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. All you do is complain. That's not true, she said, her voice shaking. I'm scared. I feel alone in this. He threw his jacket onto a chair. I'm under pressure. Do you think this is easy for me? I'm carrying our child, she said softly. I need support. That word seemed to set him off. Support, he repeated. Everything is about you and the baby. Her eyes filled with tears. Because it matters. Not like this, he said. You've changed. She stared at him. I'm pregnant. And that's all you are now, he said cruelly. Pregnant. Emotional. Weak. The words cut deeper than she expected. She stood up slowly, one hand on her belly. Don't say that, she whispered. I'm still me. He stepped closer. You're not the woman I married. Her breathing grew uneven. I didn't choose to be treated like this. Then stop pushing me, he said. I'm not pushing you, she cried. I'm asking you to come back to us. For a moment, it looked like he might say something else, something calmer, something human. But instead, his anger took over. The argument escalated quickly. Voices rose. Accusations flew. Words were said that could never be taken back. She tried to step away, to calm things down, but he followed her. Just stop, she said, holding up her hand. Don't tell me what to do, he shouted. And then it happened. In a moment of uncontrolled rage, he lashed out. It was fast, shocking, unthinkable. She cried out and stumbled backward, losing her balance. Pain shot through her body, sharp and sudden. She fell against the edge of the couch and slid to the floor, gasping. Time seemed to freeze. He stood there, breathing hard, his face pale. I didn't mean... She didn't hear the rest. Her body had already reacted. A deep pain spread through her lower stomach. Fear rushed in, cold and overwhelming. No, she whispered. Something's wrong. She curled slightly, clutching her belly. "The baby, please." Panic finally broke through his anger. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice shaking now. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm hurting. I think the baby's coming." Her breathing became rapid. A warm sensation followed, and terror filled her eyes. He backed away, shaking his head. "No, no, no." "Call for help," she cried. "Please." His hands fumbled as he reached for his phone. For the first time, he looked truly afraid. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Sirens filled the air. She lay on the stretcher, gripping the side rails, trying to stay conscious. Nurses spoke calmly but moved quickly. Her words came out broken between breaths. "It's too early," she kept saying. "It's too early." He followed behind, silent, his mind racing. Guilt crashed into him with full force. The argument replayed over and over in his head. His words, his action, the moment everything went wrong. At the hospital, doctors took over. She was rushed into a room, lights bright and voices urgent. He was told to wait outside. He sat alone in the hallway, staring at his hands. They were shaking. Hours passed slowly. Every sound made his heart jump. Finally, a doctor approached him. "There were complications," the doctor said carefully. "The baby arrived early." His chest tightened. "Is she okay?" "She's stable," the doctor replied. "Both of them are. But it was serious." Relief and fear mixed together, making him dizzy. He nodded, unable to speak. When he was finally allowed to see her, she looked smaller than he remembered. Pale, exhausted, tubes and machines surrounded her. The baby was not in the room. She turned her head slightly when she sensed him. "Where's the baby?" she asked weakly. "In the care unit," he said softly. "They're helping." Tears slid down her face. "I told you I was scared." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She closed her eyes. "Sorry doesn't fix this." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. Later that night, as she slept, his phone buzzed. A message from the other woman. "So, did you deal with her drama?" He stared at the screen in disbelief. Another message followed, laughing emojis included. "She always makes scenes." Something inside him snapped. He didn't reply. For the first time, he saw the situation clearly. The damage, the pain, the people he had hurt. Meanwhile, in the quiet of the hospital room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her body ached, but her heart hurt more. She thought about her baby fighting to survive. She thought about the home she once believed in. And she knew something had changed forever. What happened that night could never be undone. The silence between them was no longer just emotional. It was final. The days after the hospital incident moved slowly, as if time itself had become heavy. She stayed in the hospital longer than expected. Her body was weak, and her heart felt even weaker. Nurses came and went, checking machines, speaking in calm voices. They explained things carefully, using gentle words. The baby was still in special care. Small, fragile, fighting quietly. She asked to see the baby whenever she could. The first time they rolled her bed closer, tears filled her eyes. She watched the tiny chest rise and fall. Wires surrounded the small body. It scared her, but it also gave her strength. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." He visited every day at first. He stood by the door, unsure where to place himself. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost broken. He asked if she needed anything. Water, a blanket, food. She answered politely but briefly. There was a distance now that words could not cross. On the third day, a nurse gently asked her if she wanted to speak with a counselor. She nodded. Talking felt easier with someone who wasn't tied to the pain. Later that afternoon, a woman from the hospital support team sat beside her bed. She listened without judgment as the story slowly came out. The changes, the fear, the moment everything went wrong. "You didn't deserve that," the counselor said calmly. She stared at the wall. "I keep thinking maybe if I stayed quiet, none of this would have happened." The counselor shook her head. "Silence does not prevent harm. It only hides it." Those words stayed with her. Outside the hospital room, he sat alone in the hallway, staring at the floor. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the other woman. You haven't replied. Are you mad? He didn't open it. Later that night, when he finally checked his phone, there were more messages. Questions, jokes, complaints. She's probably using this to control you. One message read. He felt sick. For the first time, he didn't feel flattered. He felt exposed, ashamed. He typed a short reply. Don't contact me again. The response came fast. Wow. After everything, he turned the phone off. The next morning, her family arrived. They had been told only part of the story at first. But when they saw her condition, when they saw the fear in her eyes, they knew something was very wrong. Her mother held her hand and cried quietly. Her father stood near the window, his jaw tight. What happened? Her mother asked gently. She hesitated, then spoke slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't exaggerate. She just told the truth. The room went silent. Her father left the room for a moment. When he returned, his eyes were red. You're not alone, he said firmly. Not anymore. That day, everything shifted. Questions were asked. Reports were made. Not out of anger, but out of protection. Hospital staff followed procedure. Notes were taken. She wasn't forced to say anything she wasn't ready to say. But the truth had already stepped into the light. When he came to visit later that day, he found her family there. The air felt thick. Her father spoke first. You need to leave. He froze. I just want to see her. You've done enough, her father replied calmly. She looked at him then. Really looked at him. Please go, she said. He wanted to argue, to explain, to beg. But nothing he could say would fix what had already been done. He nodded slowly and left without another word. That night, alone in the apartment, he walked through the rooms like a stranger. The baby crib stood unfinished. Small clothes were folded neatly. Photos on the wall showed smiles that now felt fake. He sat on the couch and covered his face with his hands. Everything he thought he controlled had collapsed. Back at the hospital, she slept better than she had in weeks. Knowing her family was nearby made the room feel safer. Nurses checked on her often, smiling kindly. She began to eat a little more. Her strength returned slowly. One afternoon, she was wheeled to the care unit again. She placed a finger gently against the baby's tiny hand. The baby moved slightly, holding on. I'm proud of you, she whispered. You're strong. In that moment, something inside her settled. She stopped asking herself what she could have done differently. She stopped blaming her body. She stopped carrying guilt that was never hers to begin with. Days passed. The baby grew stronger. Small improvements were celebrated quietly. A nurse once said, "You two are fighters." She smiled for the first time in a long while. Meanwhile, his world outside was unraveling. Word spread quickly among family and close friends. Questions followed. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. At work, his focus was gone. His reputation cracked under the weight of his actions. He tried to justify things to himself at night. Stress, pressure, mistakes. But excuses sounded hollow now. One evening, he sat alone and finally cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly as the truth settled in. He had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Weeks later, she was discharged from the hospital, but the baby remained under care. She moved in with her parents for support. The room they prepared was simple but warm. Soft light, clean sheets, quiet peace. She visited the baby every day. One afternoon, as she sat beside the care unit, her phone rang. It was him. She stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. I just want to hear your voice, he said. She took a deep breath. That won't help either of us. I'm sorry, he said again. I'll spend my whole life regretting it. I hope you do, she replied calmly, because regret means you understand. There was silence. For the baby, he said. Please. The baby deserves safety, she replied. That's my only focus now. She ended the call. She didn't feel angry afterward. She felt clear. As the weeks went on, plans were made. Not loud plans. Quiet ones. Legal steps. Support systems. Counseling. Healing. The other woman tried to reach out once more. A long message. Apologies mixed with excuses. She never replied. That chapter of her life was closed. One evening, as the sun set outside the hospital window, a nurse approached her with a smile. "You can hold your baby today," she said. Her hands trembled as they placed the baby gently in her arms. The baby was small, but warm, alive, real. Tears rolled down her face as she held that tiny body close to her heart. "I've got you," she whispered, "no matter what." In that moment, the pain of the past didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. The truth was out. The masks had fallen. And while the road ahead would not be easy, it would be honest. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to hope. The day the baby finally came home was quiet and bright. Sunlight filled her parents' living room, touching the soft blanket laid carefully over the small cradle. The house smelled clean, like fresh laundry and warm tea. Her mother had woken up early to prepare everything. Her father stood near the window, pretending to read the newspaper, but glancing toward the door every few seconds. When she walked and holding the baby close to her chest, the room felt different, lighter, stronger. The baby was still small, but healthy enough to leave the hospital. The doctors had explained everything clearly. There would be checkups, extra care, patience. But there was hope, real hope. She moved slowly, carefully lowering herself onto the couch. Her mother sat beside her, adjusting the pillow behind her back. Her father stood quietly in front of her and looked down at the tiny face. "So small," he whispered. "So strong," she corrected gently. In that moment, she understood something clearly. The worst had happened, and yet they were still here, still breathing, still moving forward. The legal process had already begun quietly. She didn't speak about it often. She didn't need to. The people who needed to know already did. Papers were filed. Meetings were scheduled. Boundaries were drawn. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of protection. He had tried to reach her again during those weeks, sometimes with long messages filled with regret, sometimes with short ones asking about the baby. She answered only when it was necessary, and only about the child. Nothing more. He had lost the right to her personal thoughts. Meanwhile, his life had grown smaller. Friends kept their distance. Some judged him openly. Others simply disappeared. At work, his confidence had faded. He spoke less, laughed less. The woman he once thought understood him had vanished completely when the truth came out. Her messages stopped the moment consequences appeared. The attention he once chased turned out to be shallow and temporary. One evening, he sat alone in the apartment that used to feel like home. The baby crib was still there. He had not touched it. The silence pressed heavily against his chest. For the first time, he allowed himself to see everything clearly, not through pride, not through anger, just truth. He had broken something that trust alone could not repair. Back at her parents' home, nights were still long, but they were different now. When the baby cried, she didn't feel alone. Her mother would knock softly and step in with warm milk or a gentle smile. Her father would rock the baby in his arms in the early mornings, whispering soft words no one else could hear. She began to heal slowly, not just physically, but inside. There were moments when memories returned suddenly. The raised voice, the argument, the hospital lights. In those moments, her chest tightened. But then she would look at the baby sleeping peacefully beside her, and her breathing would steady again. She started counseling sessions regularly. The counselor helped her untangle confusion she had carried for months. "You stay because you hoped?" the counselor said once. "Yes," she admitted. "Hope is not weakness," the counselor replied. "But now your hope belongs to your future, not your past." Those words felt like a door opening. Weeks turned into months. The baby gained weight, smiled more. Tiny fingers wrapped around hers with strength that amazed her every time. She found joy in simple routines, bath time, soft lullabies, morning sunlight through curtains. She began working remotely part-time when she felt ready. Not because she had to immediately, but because she wanted to rebuild her independence. Each small step gave her confidence. One afternoon, she received a message from him asking if he could see the baby. She paused before replying. After careful thought and guidance from her family and legal advisor, she agreed to a supervised visit. The meeting took place in a quiet room at a family center. He arrived early, looking thinner than before. Nervous when she walked and holding the baby, he stood up slowly. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw the child. The baby stared at him curiously. He didn't try to speak much. He simply sat across from her, hands trembling slightly. "Can I hold?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded carefully. He held the baby gently, almost afraid to breathe too hard. The room stayed silent, except for the soft sounds of the child shifting. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, not to her this time, but to the baby. She watched quietly. There was no anger in her expression, just distance. After the visit ended, she walked out feeling lighter, not heavier. She realized something important. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting, and moving forward did not mean going back. Over time, arrangements were made. Clear rules, clear expectations. Supervised visits continued. Slowly, carefully. Trust was not given easily, and it was never unconditional again. He began attending counseling on his own as well, not because someone forced him, but because he finally understood the damage his anger had caused. Whether it was enough to fully change him remained uncertain. But at least he was no longer pretending nothing had happened. The other woman became nothing more than a distant memory. A chapter that ended without drama, without confrontation, just silence. One evening, nearly a year after the hospital night, she stood by the window in her own small rented apartment. Yes, her own place. Simple, clean, peaceful. The baby slept in a crib near the bed. She had moved out of her parents' house a month earlier. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. She wanted to stand fully on her own again. The room was quiet except for the soft of the fan. She thought back to the woman she had been a year ago, the woman who blamed herself, the woman who stayed silent out of fear of losing a marriage. That woman felt far away now. She walked to the crib and looked down at the peaceful face of her child. Tiny breaths, warm cheeks, a future still unwritten. "You saved me," she whispered softly, because in many ways the baby had. The hidden fate everyone once imagined, the perfect family, the admired couple, had fallen apart. But another fate had quietly formed beneath the surface. One built on strength instead of appearance, on truth instead of pretending. Pain had come suddenly, but resilience had grown slowly, day by day. She no longer felt defined by what happened. She felt defined by how she chose to rise after it. Outside, the night air moved gently through the open window. The world continued as it always did. Cars passed. Lights flickered in other apartments. Somewhere, laughter echoed from a nearby balcony. Life was still moving, and so was she, not as someone broken, but as someone rebuilt.